several decades ago to the US, and in the last 10-15 years or so, it has spread to the region that I mentioned earlier and has taken over pastures in that region. As a plant species, it is not considered to be palatable to the livestock. In other words, animals will stay away from it. It will not consume it. So it's definitely a weed in such systems. It outcompetes the native forages because of its high competitive ability. Therefore, if this weed is detected or seen in a pasture, within a few years, it has the potential to take over large fields or entire fields, displacing the native forages. It is an annual plant, meaning that it germinates in spring and it completes its life cycle before the winter of the same year. And it is a prolific seed producer. A single plant can produce several thousand seeds. And these seeds do not have a long period of dormancy, or they stay viable for about 3 or 4 years. And after that, they are not viable anymore. So here is it's kind of stretched, so to give you an idea of the weed that I am discussing. Close-up picture. So the base of the leaves, the characteristic of this plant is that the base of the leaves clasps around the stem, and you can pull the shoots easily from the nodes. That's part of the reason why it's called joint head grass. Now, farmers get confused with a native species called deer tongue grass. It is also considered to be a weed, but it's not as invasive or obnoxious as joint head grass. So here is an example of a field that has been outcompeted or taken over by this weed species. As you can see, there are very few forage plant species that have survived the competition caused by this weed. So the objective of this study is to determine a model to figure out when this weed germinates. As I mentioned earlier, it's a warm season annual grass, so it germinates sometime in spring, the spring months, that is April through May or so. So in order to execute the control measure, it will be good to know when exactly the weed germinates. So can you please back up? So the primary method to control this weed is to use a pre-emergence herbicide, meaning that a herbicide where the application time concurs just before the germination of the weed, or at the latest when the weeds germinate. In other words, if the herbicide is applied much after the this weed germinates, it is not effective any longer. So again, in order to determine a good window to apply this herbicide, it would be good to have a predictive model to determine the germination of this weed. Please. So 2 studies were conducted at farmer locations, one in 2016 and another this year, to come up with this degree model. So these fields were under a cool season forage, and the farmer had expressed a problem with this weed species for the past 3 to 5 years. The native forage grass species were Kentucky bluegrass, orchard grass, tall fescue, and a mixture of leguminous species. So this slide just indicates or just tells you the precipitation or rainfall data during 2016 and 17. Just to give you an idea that the fields, the locations where received average rainfall. Now, one of the things that you have to keep in mind is that in order for this pre-emergence herbicide to be activated or to provide uniform weed control, a certain amount of moisture is required to solubilize the herbicide and provide a uniform barrier on the soil, so that when this weed seed germinates, its germination processes can be affected and you get consistent weed control. In other words, if you apply this herbicide under dry conditions, when there is lack of moisture in the soil, you will not get good weed control or consistent weed control if it does not rain within a week or two after germination. So, good moisture conditions in the soil is critical to provide consistent weed control. So, what is this growing degree days? As you may know, it can be calculated very easily by subtracting the threshold temperature from the mean temperature, mean daily temperature. So, for the threshold temperature for germination of this plant is 50 degrees, similar to several warm season grasses, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, by the way. So, for example, if you have a day where the maximum temperature is 70 degrees and the minimum temperature of the day is 50 degrees Fahrenheit, then you can calculate the growing degree day for the particular day by calculating the mean temperature as simple as adding the minimum and maximum temperature and dividing it by 2, which will give you the mean temperature, and then you subtract the threshold temperature, that is 50 degrees, and you get the growing degree day. Can you please back up 1 second? So in this case, the growing degree day in this example is 15 degrees. So the way you calculate the accumulative growing degree days, you start with the Julian calendar, that is January 1, and add the growing degree day value for each day. Okay. So in 2016, for the location where we had the study, in January there were no growing degree days. That's on the first column there, and in February there were 2.1 growing degree days. In March, it accumulated to 87.2. So we collected this information by keeping a weather station at that location. Now, by April 25th, the growing degree day accumulated to 207 in 2016, whereas in 2017 it accumulated to 217 by April 18 on that second column on the right. So we went back to the field periodically to see if these weeds had germinated. So let's take a look at how it correlated to the weather data. I don't know if you can see, but at the bottom it will say that April 25, 2016. So that's when 207 growing degree days had accumulated. So you can see that the grass, the weed has germinated by then. Now if you look at the next slide, that is on April 12th of this year, we had accumulated 157 growing degree days. So this particular spot did not have any of this weed species germinate. So we went back on a daily basis subsequent to April 12th, and by April 18th, you can see that is just 6 days after the previous when you saw the previous picture was taken. The same spot, you can see that the weed seedlings had germinated. Okay, so by then the growing degree days was 217, it accumulated 217. So which clearly indicates that sometime when the growing degree days exceeds 200, that's when it triggers germination of this weed. So by monitoring the soil temperature or the prevailing temperature just above the soil level, and by calculating the growing degree days just before it reaches 200, that is a good time to apply the herbicide, because you know that once it exceeds 200, this weed will start germinating. So the subsequent few slides, I'll be talking about some of the treatments that were applied in 2016 to look at the efficacy of the herbicide called Pendimethalin. So Pendimethalin is a pre-emergence herbicide. It's a root inhibitor. So it belongs to the dinitroaniline family of herbicides. So what it does is, as soon as the weeds germinate, it affects the mitotic processes at the meristematic meristematic region of the root tips, and as a result of that, the root tips enlarge, and it is not able to expand or grow longer, and eventually the seedling dies. So it's selective only to monocots or grasses. In other words, broadleaf weeds are not affected by this herbicide. So in 2016, this herbicide was applied at approximately to 4.5 kilograms per hectare. That is one of the treatments. The second treatment was pendimethalin along with glyphosate. Applied, in this case, the glyphosate was applied at 1.12 kilograms per hectare at the same rate of, along with the same rate of pendimethalin, that is 4.48 kilograms as a tank mixture. So the reason for adding glyphosate along with pendimethalin is to make sure that if any joint head grass had germinated by then, glyphosate, as you know, is a non-selective herbicide. It will kill or it will control all the plants that have germinated or which have top growth, and that way it will be very clear that pendimethalin will any subsequent germination of joint head grass would have occurred after the application of the herbicide, and any control that you would obtain would be solely from pendimethalin. Two other treatments were glyphosate, which was the treated control. So here you can, if joint head grass germinates subsequently, you can readily assume or conclude that it was because the pre-emergence herbicide was not present. And the final treatment, or the last treatment, was the untreated control, which did not receive any herbicide. So in 2016, the treatments were applied on April 25th. We went back and evaluated weed control by visual observations or monitoring to record percent control. And at the end of the study, that is 6 months after treatment, we went there and recorded the dry weight of the weeds. All data were subjected to analysis of variance, and the means are separated using least significant difference at the 5% probability level. So this picture was taken roughly 1 month after the treatments were applied. So this is the untreated plots where the herbicide was not applied, and you can see all those grasses with the broad leaves. It's the joint head Arthraxon, or the weed species of interest in the study. So essentially, because there was no herbicide, it did not provide any control, and this grass germinated prolifically. Yes. So this was a plot that received pendimethalin plus glyphosate, again taken 1 month after treatment. So as you can see, the glyphosate component in the stack mixture pretty much killed all the vegetation in that plot, including the forage grasses. This picture was taken roughly 2 months after the herbicides were applied. On your left hand side, you will see the plot that received pendimethalin plus glyphosate, and to the right is a plot that just received the pre-emergence herbicide. So I don't know if you can see the color difference, the light green color versus the dark green color in the untreated compared to the treated plots, which signifies the establishment of the native forage grasses where the herbicides were applied. So you could start picking up distinct differences between the treated and untreated plots roughly 2 months after herbicides were applied. So this slide gives you the percent control data taken 1 and 2 months after treatment, and on the rightmost column is the data collected, the final data set collected 6 months after treatment. So pendimethalin applied by itself consistently provided about 95% control of this weed. Pendimethalin along with glyphosate provided close to 100% total control of this weed. And the remaining 2 treatments, that is glyphosate, which is the treated control, and control plots, did not provide any control at all, obviously. Yes. So when I went back, to collect the final set of data, this is the location, the field, the farmer's field, the hillside which had the problem with this weed, where the study was carried out. It looked like the entire area was taken over by this weed. And this is a close-up. Okay, so pretty much all the forages were displaced. Now, when I went to the plots where the actual treatments were applied, you could pick up exactly where the herbicides were applied. You can see that that the herbicide provided excellent control of this weed up to 6 months after treatment. And this slide shows the dry matter weight of the weed, of the concerned weed. So you can see that the first 2 treatments, that is pendimethalin and the pendimethalin followed by glyphosate, had minimal amount or quantities of this weed in the plots. The tank mixture contained essentially no joint head grass at this time. The glyphosate and control, the treatments that received and the plots that received the glyphosate alone and the ones that did not receive any herbicide had roughly 23 and 9 tons per hectare of this weed. Again, it reflects the percent control data that I presented earlier, indicating that the herbicide treatments were very effective, and in those plots where the herbicides were not applied, it was essentially taken over by this weed. So again, this is a close-up of this the plots that received these treatments. You can see the distinct differences. And I think that's all I have. Can you please advance one more slide? So to conclude, by denoting or by being able to calculate the growing degree days and by being able to understand, or if we know at what growing degree day value this weed germinates, and if you can time the herbicide application, it will provide excellent control of this weed. So it's a very good predictive or forecasting model to determine the germination of this weed. And pendimethalin applied at this high rate, that is 4.24 kilograms per hectare, provided season-long control, excellent control of this weed. Now, this was the first time this particular herbicide, pendimethalin, was applied in the US to get an idea of its efficacy to manage this weed, because it received label or registration to be applied in pasture in 2015. 2016. So the study was carried out soon after it received registration. So in 2007, so we did not have a good idea of the rate, at which rate, the lowest effective rate of the herbicide to manage this weed. So in 2016, I have not presented the data here. We evaluated lower rates of this herbicide. Okay, half the rate, that is 2.12 kilograms per hectare and 1.12 kilograms per hectare, to see if it effectively controlled this weed. And what we found out at 3 months after treatment was that it did. The 2.24, that is half the rate of this herbicide, seemed to provide good control. Now, we haven't gone back and recorded the terminal data, but it looks like the half rate, that is 2.24 kilograms per hectare of pendimethalin, should give good results. Either applied as a single application, based on the growing degree day model, or better yet, apply 1.12 kilograms initially and then go back a month later and carry out a second application of 1.12 kilograms. So that way, if there are any weeds that germinate later on, you get some residual effect from the initial application, and then you get some additional period of residual activity following the second application of the herbicide. So essentially, that's all I wanted to convey to you this morning, and I think I wanted to acknowledge a few parties for letting me carry out this study, and also wanted to thank the industry that helped register this compound, or this herbicide, and make it available to the farmers, because otherwise there was no effective control to manage this weed. So with that, I don't know if I have time for questions, but I think I'll be around to answer any questions. Thank you very much, and if you can contact me by sending an email to me if you have any questions later on. And with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Professor Chandran, for sharing your field observation with our fellow colleagues. I am thankful to you for that. Very clearly, you have explained all the observation, how the weedicide as well as this growing, they will join together. They can just minimize the use of weedicide also and manage the weeds. Just certainly, weeds are always there, and we just try to put them under low level so that they should not be menace to the other cultivation also. Thank you very much. Our second keynote speaker is Dr. Emily Laura Brand from University of East Anglia, United Kingdom. She is going to share her experience on in farming policy factors influencing farmer adoption of sustainable practices. So let us share her experience, and it will be very nice what the things are getting done in England, how our farmers are interacting and reacting to our extension programs. Oh, Madam.
Good morning. Thank you for coming along today and inviting me to speak here. So far during the conference, we have heard a lot about different sustainable practices for farming, whether it helps increase the yields, whether it's for pests or weed resistance, and to improve the environment. But what's also important is to find out whether farmers will actually even adopt these practices. And this is what I'd like to talk to you today about. Yesterday, time and time again, it was mentioned how important it is to have the knowledge exchange between scientists, farmers, and policymakers. And so a piece of research done in England, which I was part of, has done exactly that. We wanted to look at what actually influences farmers to adopt these practices that we're all researching about. So this is what I'd like to talk to you today about. I'd like to start by setting the context. Policymakers have a very difficult challenge ahead of them. They need to ensure policies can bring multiple benefits. They need to ensure that the environment is protected, that rural livelihoods are sustained and improved, but also, if land is managed correctly, it can provide so many benefits to our human needs, not just food production. And so research that can help inform policies such as these is essential. In the UK, 70% of our land is agriculture, and most of it is very intensively farmed. Here you can see an example of a sheep farm in the north of England. Water pollution is a huge problem we have in the UK. Water runoff, it causing soil erosion and contamination to the rivers, and also the pesticide and other agri-chemicals get washed into the rivers. We have 60% of nitrates coming from agriculture, 25% of phosphorus also in the rivers from agriculture, and 75% of sediment. In the European Union, we have legislation which is known as the Water Framework Directive. This was created in 2000 and encourages each member state to reach a certain level of environmental status of their water bodies by 2015. And unfortunately, in the UK, only 30%, so 70% of our water bodies are failing this directive. So more needs to be done to help protect the rivers. And so policies play a major role in this. There are different options for policy to try and encourage farmers to adopt sustainable practices. One method is to incentivize farmers, often paying them an annual payment to protect soil, protect water, and these can often be targeted to vulnerable areas where soil erosion is a huge problem or more trees need to be planted. Guidance and training is another option, so providing free training and advice to farmers, trying to encourage them to adopt these practices voluntarily. And then regulation is at the other extreme, where it's a much more forceful option of policy, where we try to force farmers to do a particular measure, and if they don't abide, then penalties will be inflicted. So getting the right combination of these different policy mechanisms is crucial, and the research that I'm involved in helps inform the government's policies. In 2011, the British government created a research platform known as the Demonstration Test Catchments. Now, this is a huge research platform of over 40 different organisations across the country. We have economists, geologists, chemists, hydrologists, social scientists, a whole range of interdisciplinary expertise involved in this platform. And the overall goal of this research platform is to try and assess the effectiveness of a variety of different land management practices, mainly to reduce water pollution, but also ensuring that farm profitability isn't impeded. So what we've gone and done is in 4 different river catchments across the country, we have chosen these 4 catchments based on the differences in farming system. So in the east of the country, in the Wentham catchment, we have very large cereal farmers growing crops such as wheat and barley, maize. In the north, in the Eden catchment, this is our mainly upland hill area, and we have a lot of sheep grazing there. Then down in the southwest, in the Avon and Tamar catchment, this is where our dairy and beef cattle farms are located. So working with farmers in these 4 rivers, catchments, we have changed their farming practices and then monitored how effective this has been looking at the water quality in those rivers. So our teams go out, look at the monitoring stations, and have been measuring this since 2011. So we've collected a lot of data for the past 6 years on how effective our practices have been on the water quality. But another major part of our research has been engaging stakeholders, and so actually talking to the farmers. Not only farmers that we're working with, but also farmers in the wider region and wider area. And so this is what I'd like to talk to you today mainly about. We have conducted surveys with our farmers, and the first one, we wanted to find out what are they actually doing on their farms. Are they currently already adopting these sustainable farming practices? And if not, would they be likely or unlikely to in the future? The second survey was actually with farm advisors. We have a lot of different organisations, not just governmental, but charity organisations that provide free advice to farmers, and they try to encourage farmers to adopt different practices. So I went out and interviewed these different farm advisors to find out what are they actually recommending, to try and identify, are there any gaps in recommendations? Is nobody recommending, say, tree planting? Or is there a lot of overlap? Is everybody recommending the same thing and therefore wasting resources and being inefficient? The third and final survey was actually asking farmers, what will it take to actually encourage you to adopt? So what are the motivations and what are the barriers? So to start with, I'd like to talk to you about the first survey. Now this actually assessed what the current uptake is of sustainable practices with our farmers. In the UK, we have a manual of about 86 different sustainable farming practices that could be implemented. They are all very scientifically, lots of scientific evidence to prove their effectiveness in helping improve the environment. There are 86 different measures which can reduce water pollution, reduce greenhouse gases, and help improve soil conditions. So we went out and asked each farmer, of all these 86 measures, are you doing any of them on your land? And so the results showed there was a huge variability in the uptake. And now each bar is one of the measures that they could do. And I've ordered them in terms of current uptake. So those at the top are very heavily adopted at the moment, and those at the bottom are unlikely and not commonly adopted. And we can see that those that are currently adopted are ones which help improve the farmer's fertilizer and manure management. So this is a very important asset for them that costs money to buy the fertilizer, and the government actually have regulations that ensure they apply during certain dates, the amounts that they can apply, and if they do not abide by these rules, they will be penalised. So there's no surprise there that it's heavily adopted. But it's the ones that require land use change which are not adopted. It requires a huge change in the whole farm system, and so people are do not find that popular. So when a farmer wasn't adopting a measure, we then asked, how likely are you to do it in the future? Are you very likely, likely, unlikely, or never want to consider doing it? I've just selected the 7 examples of different farm practices that we are trying to encourage. The first one, for example, is farm track management. Now, farm track management can strongly encourage good management of soil. It's an easy pathway for soil erosion to travel down to the river. So if you can manage your tracks correctly, it saves a lot of soil trouble on your farm. Now, this was very common, and lots of farmers were already doing this. So therefore, policy don't need to target this measure. It's already easily adopted. However, those measures that are not adopted very well, such as growing biomass crops or creating artificial wetlands on farms, because this is unpopular, most farmers said they were unlikely or would never consider doing it. This will require a lot of policy implementation to try and encourage farmers to adopt. So this is where we would need to target our policy. In the middle range, we have some measures that farmers are not currently doing, but they said they were quite positive towards doing in the future. They were very likely or likely to resite their gates, or even grow cover crops during the winter to help protect their soils. So again, this might be an easy option for policy to be able to encourage farmers to do so. But how best should we encourage them? Now, farm advisors play a crucial role in helping inform farmers of research and how best to manage their land. And so where our monitor farms are, in the northwest, southwest and East Anglia parts of England, we went and interviewed farm advisors. Our main questions were, what measures do you actually recommend to farmers? And to find out whether recommendations conflict one another, whether they are the same, or whether there are any gaps. And so a huge variety of farm advisors exist in the UK. We have different governmental organisations that provide advice free of charge. We have different environmental charities which also provide advice. And then we have those from businesses such as seed salesmen, fertilizer salesmen, agronomists, vets. They all provide advice to our farmers and are influencing farmer decision making. So by speaking to these different advisors, we were able to ask them, what are you recommending to the farmers in terms of water pollution in this scenario? So the most recommended recommendation in the UK was soil analysis. So encouraging farmers to analyse their soils to see what actually needs to be applied, how much fertilizer is necessary, or how much phosphorus. So we can identify what's heavily recommended, but also what's not recommended. Now, what's also important is to find out how similar are the recommendations. Using statistical analysis, Proscal, we were able to plot each advisor that we interviewed on a 2-dimensional scale. Now, so each of these dots is somebody that we interviewed. And the advisors that are close together, so the 2 dots near to each other, they are people who are recommending similar measures and similar sustainable practices. Those far apart are recommending completely different things. And so by looking at one organisation, named CSFO, is a government organisation in the UK, we can see where their advisors fall within this plot. Now, on its own, it doesn't tell us much information, but if we compare it to another organisation, NE, Natural England, which is another government organisation, we can see where there are overlaps. So here, there is partial overlap, but also they do have different roles. They are recommending different sustainable measures to farmers. And again, another environmental organisation, a part of the government, we can see EA has a lot of overlap with NE, and so they have a very similar role. So perhaps some inefficiencies are occurring here. What was even more interesting was how these roles differed across the country. And so by looking at the northwest and southwest, the outer two plots, we can see that the environmental charities actually play a large role. They have a good connection with farmers, and they are spreading advice within those communities. Whereas in the middle one, we can see environmental charities as a much narrower remit, and they're not communicating with farmers as much. So as a policymaker, I would consider in the northwest and southwest of England, I would engage more with the environmental charities and perhaps even provide them with funding to help spread the messages and knowledge exchange with the farmers from research. But this just shows from the three different areas that I would need to provide different policies in the different areas to be most effective. Now, I move on to the final survey, and this is where I would need a mobile microphone, because I usually dance across the stage. But I'd like to say, if we picture farmers along a spectrum, at one end of the spectrum, put my farmer hat on, you'd imagine someone who just like, no, get off my land, I'm not listening to you, I don't want to change my farming practice. So that's one extreme. And then what we want to try and do is shift their opinions and attitudes along the spectrum, so that if an advisor was to come to them, they think, that sounds like a good idea, I'm not quite convinced, I need more scientific evidence. Then the next person along the spectrum, yeah, go on, I'll give it a go, I'll try that measure, I'll try that practice on my farm, see what happens. And then the final person is, yes, that was the best thing I've ever done on my farm, I'm going to tell everyone about it, all my friends and farming neighbours, it's the best option, you should do this. So, as a policymaker, I want to have farmers at that end of the spectrum, right? Everybody adopting these measures that are helping the environment, helping their farm business. So how do we do that? We ask the farmers, we ask them, how do we do this? So what motivates farmers to actually adopt these practices? What was it that encourages them? But also, what are the barriers? What do we need to overcome? The second part of the survey also inquired about who did they listen to? Who did they actually gain advice from? Who do they want advice from? And so by asking farmers, we found that out. Now, I mentioned earlier the manual of 86 different measures. Now, we couldn't ask them about all these measures. So we selected 11 different measures to go into lots of detail to find out exactly what encouraged them to adopt tree planting or not. And so we asked farmers who have adopted, who have done tree planting, for example, and what was it that their decision process was to get to that practice, but also those who haven't done the practice. So if people haven't tree planted, why not? Why are they not planting trees? So there are different methods to describe the information that we gathered from these qualitative interviews. From the farmers that had adopted measures, it was clear that there are different factors at play in determining their decision process. So here I've outlined 6 different factors that can determine their decisions. The farm characteristics, so how large their farm was, what is it they're farming, the weather. Internal factors is their attitudes and their beliefs, their feelings. And we have market factors, obviously economics, regulations will impact them, financial incentives, and of course advice, whether they've received advice. So to show you an example of a decision process, farmers that had taken land out of production to help improve environment, some of them may have unproductive land and so chose to, after advice and after a grant of some incentive, financial incentive, they then took the land out. For sediment traps, which is digging a pond on their farm to collect water and collect runoff, we discovered that a lot more different factors are at play here, and it needed more encouraging and more advice, more talking with their neighbours, reading the press, to actually implement this measure. The final example is resurfacing farm tracks. So the farm track management I spoke of earlier required lots of different factors also. So we can see here that depending on what practice we're trying to encourage, it depends on different factors that are influencing that farmer. Speaking to farmers who hadn't adopted particular measures, we were also able to identify the barriers. What do we need to overcome? What should policy be targeting? And so here we had 8 different factors that are influencing farmer behaviour. On the left, in the grey scale, we have internal factors. So the demographics is the age of the farmer, the sex of the farmer. And the automatic motivation is what they automatically reflect, what their habits are, what they always do. And the reflective motivation is when they think and they consider and have their attitudes. Capability represents whether they feel they have the knowledge, are they capable of actually doing this measure? And then on the right-hand side in the colours, we have the external factors, so the institutional factors and economics, much more out of the farmer's control, but much more influential by policy. Now, looking at the different practices, we were able to see what did farmers find as barriers? Why weren't they adopting, say, taking land out of production? Now here, the bigger the colour, the more influential of that factor is. So economics was playing a huge role in taking land out of production. Farmers believed it's not cost effective to take their land out of production. They want to farm their land. But with sediment traps, economics is not so much of an issue. It's more the capability. The grey capability and reflective motivations played the largest section here. They feel they don't know enough. They think it's a hassle and even dangerous, some said. And so here we could easily target policy to provide more advice and provide the knowledge and expertise so that they feel capable to do this. Just briefly looking at 4 other examples, this just demonstrates how varied the different barriers actually are for the different practices. And so if we are wanting to encourage any of the practices that we've been hearing about this past 2 days, we could investigate what are the barriers to that specific practice, what do we need to do to try and encourage more farmers to do them. So through one method that I keep mentioning of farm advice, farm extension, asking farmers who do they actually listen to can be very helpful. There's no point if someone doesn't like them and they're not going to listen to them. So we asked farmers about all the different organisations in England that provide advice and who would they listen to and why. What are the reasons why they listen? And this created so much conversation and a diverse amount of qualitative data. To summarise it, we used word clouds. And so word clouds are used heavily in internet and IT software and usually try to display which words are most prominent, how often they occur. So just to demonstrate, I've used the web page from this conference and created a word cloud. And here we can see that agriculture, the word conference, and science, university, they came up most frequent. So this just demonstrates the use of word clouds. And if I apply this to our research, farmers were listening to CSFOs, the one on the left, because of their grants. They provide financial incentives to carry out these sustainable practices. However, on the right, the Environment Agency, EA, farmers were listening to them because they said they were the government, or we have to listen to the government, so we have to listen. But with the red text, this is when farmers don't trust them. They don't listen to these farmers. So salespeople, the sales fertilizer men or the pesticide salesmen, there were lack of trust. They think they're biased, they're commercial. Even for the water companies, they were called the enemy. So this wouldn't be a good option to try and convey messages through the water company or salespeople. I would be better off selling the messages through independent advisors or government advisors. Again, looking at the benefit of looking at different catchments in different areas in the UK, we can see the differences across the 3 different regions. So in the Eden and Tamar, farmers were listening to the CSF officers because of the grant. And although the grant is also offered in the Wensum in the middle teardrop, it wasn't as important. Knowledge was most important. The farmers felt that knowledge was much more of a key influential factor that would encourage them to listen to these advisors. Now, that brings me towards the end of the presentation. This research was funded by the British government and so has had a strong influence on actually informing agricultural policies in the UK. So a number of different policy briefings were created. There's also academic literature, so we've been able to convey our messages to the academic audience. But also what was crucial was conveying to the farmers. We have newsletters that go out to the farmers to be able to tell them our results. And then again, government reports with much more information built upon the policy briefings. So it's crucial to make sure the message is spread is to actually communicate with the policymakers, the farmers, and other researchers. And it's maintaining that communication and that bond which is crucial. The key messages I'd like to give to you today, and hopefully you can find helpful in your own research, is that no matter what sustainable practice we're looking at, engaging with the farmers is extremely essential, and also the wider stakeholders, so in our case, the farm advisors, especially when designing policy to help understand our audience. Gaining knowledge of the motivations, the barriers, and the role of different advisors to help encourage specific practices is also important. Gaining both perspectives of the story, so in this case the farmers and the farm advisors, can be very helpful. And studying multiple regions, as the diversity is extremely huge and provides greater insights. So it's not only important to decide what we want to encourage, but also how and who should do the encouraging. And I'd like to thank you for listening and for your attention, and that brings me to the end of the presentation. Thank you.
I must request Rakesh ji to give some 1 or 2 points.
Right. Sure. I think it was a great presentation. Thank you, Dr. Rain, for sharing your experiences with us. So, I mean, these are important policy decisions, and in terms of long-term sustainability of farmlands, such practices play a key role to not only foster sustainability but also to make sure that these farming practices are environmentally friendly, and the challenge here is that how do you balance productivity of farms while maintaining sustainability. So based on my experiences with our farmers in the US, that's one of the questions that I get asked most. While some of these practices incur costs, there are certain other practices that are easy to adopt and incur much lower costs. How do I put in this inputs or additional resources necessary to carry out these sustainable practices? And we have similar incentives that some of these commercial producers with large tracts of lands are provided. So most of the times, as long as we keep providing them the incentives, they keep practicing these recommendations. And once the payments stop, then sometimes, in some cases, they revert back to the way they were used to doing things, and in other cases, they they tend to practice these recommendations into the future. And as you pointed out, there's a whole range of farmers. I think farmers are universal wherever you go. There's so you rightly pointed out the the curve there. So it is a challenge, it's a clear challenge as you demonstrated, and it takes concerted efforts between the government, and then in some cases the industry, as you pointed out, could be an obstacle because a lot of times, especially where there's knowledge barrier, farmers may tend to go after the recommendations made by the industry, and especially because it could be cost effective, so that needs to be addressed too. But yeah, it is a challenge, and the important work that people like you do would ensure that such practices, are carried out on a broader scale. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, madam. Now I request.
Sir, excuse me. May I have one question for you?
Okay.
See, water is input resource, all of us know. They are available in different places, in different levels, compared to what farmer needs. How do we balance this water requirement? Especially the rain harvesting is one very important thing which is missing. I don't know in part of UK how you manage water. If only we are able to tap the water in the respective places, we won't be needing dams and other things. Anyway, I don't want to lecture here. See, one part is the rain harvesting, which is very important. The other part is how do you ensure that polluted water doesn't diffuse into the underground, where they play havoc, to the farmer. It's not the question of mere availability of the water. How good or how better quality is the water that is going into the aquifers. So these challenges are there, unknown to farmers, where they try to tap. Unfortunately, the hydrogeology may not help. So this is where the governmental effort is needed, especially in countries like India, where people are, they use divine. My experience is the diviner is more successful than the geohydrologist or hydrogeologist. I don't know what is the correct word. So how do you ensure that these challenges are met or addressed by farmers at respective places? What is the advisory you give to such farmers?
With your first point about rain harvesting, in England our climate is very different to the wide-ranging climate you have here in India. There's only parts of the country in the east which suffer sometimes from drought, and here where we try and overcome this with irrigation, each farm usually has their own reservoir pond to extract from during the dry months. But with such a wet climate, those reservoirs are able to refill during the winter months. So we don't have as much of a problem with water quantity in the UK. With groundwater, this is a huge problem for us. The infiltration of the pollution has occurred, from the damage that we did 10, 20 years ago, and they're already polluted, and so there's no going back. So all that we can do now is help improve farming practices today so that hopefully in the future less pollution is entering the groundwater. The manual I mentioned with the different practices, it does include some farming practices that help reduce the pollution infiltration, but the main problem in the UK is surface runoff pollution. So when farmers over-apply fertilizer and then a rainfall event happens and washes the excess fertilizer and it's just washed away, wasted money for the farmer and also damage to the environment and fisheries. So it's that sort of education that we're trying to encourage with farmers, just looking at the weather forecast more to discover, it's going to rain tomorrow, don't go spraying your fertilizer. It's that sort of simple messages that can be quite effective. But in terms of, it's just a huge challenge. I think globally we're all facing the same challenges, that policy plays a huge role, and we need to ensure that governments are on board with the scientists and the farmers' benefits. They really need to be communicating more, and I don't know the situation in India, whether the government funds much research, but if there's a platform or something that can help that communication gap, that's essential, I believe. Thank you.
Okay, we should go for the next presentation. Next keynote speaker, Dr. Kiran Kumar ji. He is discussing on the governance of food security and millet cultivation in India. I invite Dr. J. Kiran Kumar ji for keynote address.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am going to present on a topic, governance of food security and millet cultivation in India. This topic emerged out of my observations on governance issues related to food security and nutritional security, and also how millet cultivation is happening in India, and how there are issues with food security governance, and what can be done through millet cultivation to address this issue. So most of the facts that are presented are from legislations, proceedings of meetings, and general statistics that try to emphasize how governance is essential for food security, and millet cultivation can be a contributing factor towards this. So to begin with, I have certain fundamental assumptions which I believe most of us would think is appropriate and are necessary for governance of food security. One thing, agriculture is a critical element in the Indian economy. It's a major sector, and India being the second largest, having the second largest population, food security is vital for its development. And food production, increasing food production alone or increasing productivity alone would not be sufficient to address the food security issue. Governance is a key attribute or critical factor for food security, and I assume that millets have a role in Indian food security. Further, there is a need for change in policies from time to time with the realities that change, and policy has to be in tune with the realities. So these are the fundamental assumptions or beliefs with which I try to address this two major issues in this presentation. A brief snapshot, India has about 328.7 million hectares. That's a huge area, but significantly it has the second largest agricultural land. And one of the key factors that it is important is most of the rural population is still dependent on agriculture, even though the contribution of agriculture as such has gone down with the increasing share of services and manufacturing taking greater role in the economy as such, but still large population is dependent. And agricultural exports have been contributing significantly due to the increased productivity over the years. We have been able to not only cater to the local population, but we are also exporting significantly to the world economy. And the last point, underlying point, is that India is the largest producer of millets. So that has something to do with the issue at hand. So this is the sector-wise contribution. So as I mentioned, still industry and services are contributing, but agriculture and allied sectors gross value is coming down over the years. So if you look at the food grain production, we are definitely galloping. In the early 20th century, we were deficient of food security needs, and we had to rely on food imports to meet our requirements. As of now, we are closing very close. We are close to 270 million mark, and we are breaching this mark very regularly in spite of whatever bad monsoon or bad climate, or even in the wake of climate change that is wreaking havoc in parts of the world. But still we have been consistently able to meet the mark of 250 to 270 million metric tons, which is quite an achievement. So we come to the issue at hand, that is hunger in India is still prevalent, and there is some amount of malnourishment as per FAO studies. A third of world's malnourished children live in India. So that is a issue of concern, because at one hand we have a paradoxical situation where a lot of food grain productivity improvements have taken place, and food grain production has reached astounding proportions, but still we have malnourishment of humongous scale. So this is signifying that the issue is not of production, but the issue is more related to legislation, implementation of those legislations, plugging gaps, and also the arresting inflation, because probably some people are not able to reach these or earn these food grains, because the wages they are earning are falling short of the food grain prices that are prevalent. So as I mentioned, it's a paradoxical situation. As of September 2017, we have the stocks, the so-called buffer stocks at 45.99 million tons. But if we look at the annual offtake of food grains at an all India level, this is keeping in view the targeted public distribution system which we have, wherein the government provides food grains to below poverty level and other marginalized communities at a very cheap prices. So it's quite a paradoxical situation. So I would coming to food security. Food security is based on these 4 pillars, that is food availability, that is enough production, food access, it has to be available at the right place, right time, food stability or resilience, storage conditions, and food utilization. Is the food produced is being utilized in the proper way, or the food grain produced is in a usable condition. So some of the challenges in ensuring food security earlier was there was no legislation, but India has made a landmark legislation through enactment of National Food Security Act in 2013, and this has actually given a constitutional validity to this act in terms of right to food to all the population. And the other issue is that of inflation, that is disproportionate rise in food prices. So food affordability is an issue for some communities, some sections of the population. So, and another issue where governance would be of key challenge, it would be prevention of corruption and plugging of leakages in the public distribution system. Of course, there have been several improvements within the public distribution system, and several steps have been taken, but still there are leakages that need to be plugged in. So the National Food Security Act, something to discuss about, it provided a right to food. It moved away from survival approach to a life cycle approach, where a safety net is provided at every life stage, so that food grains are given as per the age of the individual, and more importantly it aims to provide subsidized food grains to almost 2/3 of the Indian population. The coverage is huge. It covers 75% of rural India and 50% of the urban population. From the enactment, it wishes to provide 5 kg of food grains per month per person at rupees 3,2 per 1, respectively for rice, wheat and coarse grain. So coarse grains in this context would be mostly millets. So we will come to the millets aspect when we try to understand what is really happening with the millet growing scenario and millet consumption within India. So what is the food security problem intractable? Is it a difficult one to come to terms with? But if we look at India's food security problem is not of much of production, but it's all about distribution to the right population group. So there are challenges which overwhelm the availability, challenges of economic and physical nature which overwhelm the availability issue. So income growth will not definitely result in improvements in health and nutritional status of children. So there is a weak relationship between income growth and nutritional outcomes due to food security issues. So we will go back to the Green Revolution days, how India became self-sufficient in terms of food production, especially with wheat achieving a significant growth. So high yielding varieties of wheat and rice aided in this, along with irrigation made it possible that wheat and rice was sufficient enough. So in this process what happened was that millets did not get the status that they deserve, and rice and wheat occupied key roles in the public distribution systems. So this is where millets got a raw deal. So now we come to the millets aspect. What is the status of millet cultivation in India, and how important millets are for the Indian scenario? So if you look at the global millet scenario, India appears to be the largest producer as well as the largest consumer of millets. So for the uninitiated, these are the core cereal, that is sorghum, pearl millet, maize, barley and other millets together constitute the core cereals. And apart from maize, barley, the other millets along with the small millets are also called as nutri cereals because of the amount of nutrition and nutraceutical values they have. So some of the millet growing regions are mostly towards the mainland, and they are dry and arid regions where annual rainfall is about 350 mm and temperatures are usually about 30 degrees Celsius. So similarly with regard to bajra, it's grown in Rajasthan, Gujarat, Haryana, Punjab, other states where dry tracts are there, and again the temperature is between 25 to 35 degrees, and most of the time the rainfalls, the precipitation is less than 350 mm. Same is the fact with sorghum growing areas. It's a huge tract, but the cultivation happens in sporadic areas, so that's why we don't find enough production on the lines of rice and wheat. So looking at the Indian farm output trends, if we look at rice and wheat are occupying significant positions, whereas if you look at core cereals, they never crossed 45 million tons throughout in the last 5 to 6 years. So this scenario has been continuing since past several years, past several decades, because rice and wheat have overtaken the key position. So the same thing I wish to depict here. Since 1955 to 56, if you were to look at the trends, rice and wheat have been occupying significant position. and they have contributed to the food requirements of the country. Whereas millets are slowly but surely losing importance in the food palette of the country. So here I wish to look at three different aspects, that is area under cultivation, production in lakh tons, and productivity, whether productivity jumps are happening or not. If you look at 1955 to 56 and the next period would be 2011-12, only in case of finger millet we see doubling of productivity, that is from 800 kgs to 1600 kgs, and in pearl millet it has almost tripled from 300 to 1171. Whereas the other millets, we find that there is a lot of stagnation. Probably this could be due to non-availability of improved varieties, not enough research happening, or farmers are not keen on growing millets because of their low productivity levels, and also their uptake in the distribution or procurement system is low. These are all factors that could be the reason why productivity is not improving and there is no demand from the producer side. So trends in areas again signify that if you look at these millets, more or less there has been decline in almost all the categories of millets which we have seen from 1955 to this decade. Similarly, if you look at only pearl millet is showing signs of encouragement in terms of production, whereas all the other millets are showing a decline. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, that the productivity trends in the Indian millets are of marginal nature, means of course pearl millet and finger millet, as I mentioned, have shown significant jumps, but still there is lot to be developed in this scenario. Now I come to the premise why millets are required for food security. Over reliance on rice and wheat is likely to endanger our food availability in the long run, and due to the stagnating productivity issues both in production and productivity. And millets often neglected can be grown under dry conditions where there is not much requirement for irrigation. With lesser inputs they can yield good, and they are one of the good mechanism to tide over difficult conditions, and they can offer something as input food security, towards food security, and also to the livestock that is there at the farmers farm level. So more millets in the food system would contribute to greater grain availability, not only in terms of quantity but also quality. Why quality of the millets is of significance, I would like to mention. See, millets take very little or require very little water, which is of great importance for a country like India, where most of the areas are likely to fall under, most of the peninsular India is likely to fall under arid and semi-arid climates. So in terms of nutrients also they score over other grains like foxtail millet and finger millet, contribute significantly towards our nutritional requirement. Not only food requirements, but the nutritional requirements are also taken care apart from the fiber value they provide. So what kind of policy support is required for millet cultivation in India, and what has been provided? So there was this INSIM program which reiterated that there is a need for intensive millets cultivation, launched during 2011-12, and a pilot scheme was established for nutri farms in districts of the country where malnutrition was prevalent during 2013-14. So in 100 districts of the state, of 9 states, pearl millet, maize and finger millets were promoted as part of this INSIM program. So one of the key fillip to millets was when it was the core cereals were included in the Food Security Act and were supposed to be given at 1 rupee per kg to eligible population, and NFSM, that is National Food Security Mission, is being implemented in 182 districts of the different states. So in this, as part of this program as well, millets and core cereals form part of this thing, and districts where 70% of the area is covered by total core cereals have been selected primarily to encourage millet cultivation. And of course there are several ground level programs in terms of extension, outreach, technology transfer, in like frontline demonstrations, accelerated crop production programs, availability of seed, and research support for value addition of millets, because most people are not aware as to how to consume millets in their present form. So a lot of value addition support has been provided, and marketing support of course is gaining traction. So finally there are certain observations. How can millets be promoted as part of this food security and nutritional security issue? One thing is, mere price support is not valuable if it is not backed by procurement. So procurement becomes more and more crucial. If at all there is no procurement, no farmer would like to cultivate, no matter whatever may be the price support, because he will have to fend for himself and he may have to find his own markets. So procurement is crucial. So the mistakes of green revolution, that is over reliance on rice and wheat, have to be corrected. Maybe it's time that we take up millet cultivation in parts where it is suitable. No, it's not like that we are going to take up millet cultivation in coastal areas or black cotton soils. It's like where in arid and semi-arid climates, where millet cultivation can be promoted, has to be taken up in a much bigger way. Then contamination of millets. What I mean by contamination of millets is not physical contamination, but the approach towards millets, like millets being substituted by pseudo cereals like quinoa and all, which are not within the reach of poor population. So such projection should be avoided, and consumer awareness and acceptability is key, because most consumers or present day consumers do not know how to consume millets in their present form, or they do not like because of their palatability and such issues. And there is a danger of upmarket status being attributed to millets. Earlier millets were looked down as a low market food grain. So now the reverse is happening, that the certain upmarket status is being provided to millets because it is looked at as a sure-shot insurance against diabetes and other lifestyle diseases. So this should be avoided, and the availability of millets should not be lost because of this upmarket status. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna Kumar. If any question is there, he will be answering. And in clarification also is required, because you know millet is certainly gaining importance in North India also. I am from Uttar Pradesh. Their millet cultivation is taking a little shape because it is anti-diabetic problem. Some people are realizing that it is affecting for the diabetic people it is useful. So any question and query is required, Mr. Kumar will answer it.
Can you use a mic? It's not audible.
The millets are good. What sort of health conditions or diseases where we can use these millets, which are very good? Can you name few things?
You mean to say against which diseases they can be?
Yeah.
No,
Yes.
they generally are not like, they are not preventive in nature, but they offer some nutraceuticals in terms of they are high in fiber, they are high in certain micronutrients, which are generally not available because of overmilling in rice and wheat. So that's what we are observing in the market, is that people are trying to at least fix up their nutritional benefits by having at least one meal of millets as part of their lifestyle. So in that way, millets offer some help, but they are not a sure shot recipe for or a prevention for certain diseases.
Thank you.
There is apprehension, as you said, contamination is also happening in millets, especially pre-harvesting side. Some weevil or some insects will enter inside, and so the microbial incidence of disease will be more in millets. Being small, they are prone for attraction of these microbes. That is one thing. The other is what is the glycemic index of this relative to the rice. Rice is supposed to have, the latest ones have 51 glycemic index compared to 70 and above for other cereals. But compared to that, what would be the glycemic index? Not only in terms of nutrients, even in terms of health factors. Quality is one aspect, health is another aspect. So they are interrelated. Now coming to the health, so one is protection of these millets during the storage. The other is how far the glycemic index and other things will help to not to get these diabetes and other diseases purely from the disease incidence.
First of all, I wish to correct. When I mentioned contamination of millets, I clearly said that I am not speaking about the physical contamination of millets. What I said was the way the millets are being positioned vis-a-vis the pseudo-cereals like quinoa and all. So I did not mean physical contamination. So, and I would not be in a position to answer that question because I am not a scientist. I am kind of a consultant who tries to dispense some advice. Coming to the glycemic index thing, I think some food technologist would or a food science grad can explain. Certainly millets are beneficial because of the glycemic index thing, because they kind of reduce the cravings that arise because of consumption of foods which are high in oil and sugar. So in that sense, they are offer a good alternative towards to these junk food or snacks that are developed out of that are high in sugar and oil. So whereas whether millets are really contributing to reduction of lifestyle diseases, I think that's a different realm which I will not be able to enter into. So thank you for your questions.
All right. My name is Timemwe from Malawi in Africa.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for your very good presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have two simple questions to you. The first question, you mentioned that the government of India provides, is it some grain or at a cheaper price, especially to those communities that are living below the poverty line, or I would call them like the marginalized. But now my question to that one, because the model or the system is a bit similar to like in my country and other countries in the SADC or the sub-Saharan region in Africa. So what systems, I know you said you are a consultant, but from your knowledge, what systems is the government putting in place in selecting the main beneficiaries of this subsidy program, avoiding that even those who are above the poverty line, they are also benefiting from the same initiatives? I would give you an example in my country under the same system on what happens. The government would say, we provide, let's say, maize, because like in Africa, especially in the SADC regions or sub-Saharan regions, wheat and rice especially I should say rice and maize are the main staple food. So the government would say, we'll provide this at a lower price to only those people who are marginalized. So we have seen people who are living above the poverty line. They are rich, they have money. They do send some vendors, all right, and they queue and buy the cheaper rice in large quantities and give to these people, and they also sell. You know what I mean? So in the same scenario, making the underprivileged not benefiting. So what are the selection or what are the measures that the government is putting in place to make sure that the intended beneficiaries are getting the support? That is the first question. Then the second question, in your presentation, you have projected very well on the benefit of millet in sustaining the food security in India. But you have also mentioned a lot of challenges. Now, my fear is that, though I'm not an Indian, but I'm afraid that maybe in the long run, you may end up losing the biodiversity of the millet because there is no preference from the farmers because maybe there is low promotion and the like. So, yes, you're a consultant, but what is your knowledge in terms of what government is doing to make sure that it is conserving the biodiversity of the millet, and also if there are at all any other linkages with the maybe Indian national gene banks or international gene banks, so that you end up at the time when you find out that rice and wheat is no longer productive, you need millet and you don't have the species to grow. So what is the government doing? Thank you very much.
Yeah. What I can comprehend is you have asked two questions. One is about the picking of beneficiaries, and second one is about the government support to promotion of millets. The first one, there is a well-laid structure, rules and norms are there as to how beneficiaries can be added to the subsidized food program, that is the public distribution system we have. So in most of the urban areas, yeah, there are urban poor are selected based on the income levels they have. There is some proxy as to how income can be measured, and whereas in the rural areas, village level meetings are conducted. There is this peer group meetings where beneficiaries are identified. Apart from these things, the migrant population are also covered through the subsidized food program. Coming to the promotion, I think there is a small beginning that happened through this INSIMP program that laid thrust on cultivation of millets. Apart from cultivation of millets, several other activities have been promoting. As I mentioned in the presentation, mere price support will not help in this matter. Procurement, providing market support, enriching the interests of the consumers, or providing value addition to millets alone will help in this matter. Otherwise, just providing a procurement mechanism would not be of much use. So the INSIM program is looking at a comprehensive solution for the promotion of millets. That's what I could relate to. Thank you.
Thank you, Krishna Kumarji, for your nice compilation. You know, at least we should have a holistic data before proceeding on any other, for giving any emphasis on the production system. So, Mr. Kumarji has given good data about this, our millet cultivation in India, and what emphasis should be given for its further cultivation. With this three keynote address, we come to the close to this session, and I am grateful to this organizing committee for giving the opportunity to chair the session, and I am thankful to my three keynote speakers for delivering their talk in a better way. Thank you.
Now, we request our Honorable Chairman, Dr. Ajay Kumar Sir, to give a token of appreciation to our international speakers. To receive these mementos, we call upon Professor Emily Laura Green, University of East Anglia, Norwich, UK. Please give a great round of applause to her. Next, we call upon Professor Rakesh S. Chandran, West Virginia University, USA. For now, we have completed this session. I request everyone to take a tea break. Thank you.